Well, we're ready for the second part of our presentation on total health, discovery of total health. We talked in our first presentation about how people would love to have total health. We all want to not suffer. We want to have full comfort. We don't want to be miserable. We talked about the things that we should eat, the things we should not eat. And, as I've been working in some of the places and some of the cultures that I've been with, it's amazing to see the results of those who have followed God's methods contrasted with the results of those who have followed their own methods. Now, you can't fault people completely because we're kind of a product of our culture. We eat what our culture eats sometimes. I was talking to my brother one time, and we were talking about the fact that heart disease runs in our family. We were looking at it on my father's side of the family. If you're male and you have our last name, you're probably going to have a heart attack when you're 50 to 55, and you may or may not survive it. And I was kind of singing the blues, saying, I'm 35 or whatever, and does that mean I got 15 more years till I'm kaput or what? I'm a little bit concerned about this. And he said, I was thinking the other day, he said, heart disease runs in our family, but so does speaking English. He said, think about it. Maybe it's what we were taught to do. And from one civilization to the next or one society to the next, we see that they do what their societies taught them to do. If you look at people in North America, after the pioneers came over and they lived on venison and rabbits and whatever they could all winter, and then they got some vegetables in the spring and whatever, but people kind of gravitated toward a meat and potatoes diet in lots of parts of North America. And we kind of developed this aggregate life expectancy here. You go to this society and you can see, well, there's going to be this many cases of heart disease, there's going to be this many cases of cancer, there's going to be this much diabetes. We could kind of look at the tables of statistics and kind of gauge what is going to happen to the average person within that group and that society. We go to Asia and we look at those people and say, well, those people over there, Asians got it great. I mean, that's a great ethnicity. Asians don't get any heart disease to speak of. You don't find osteoporosis in an Asian woman ever. You don't find breast cancer in Asian women hardly ever. You don't find hardly any diabetes in Asian people. Man, they must be the master race. This is, I wish I was born Asian. I wouldn't have to buy any health insurance, and, I wouldn't even have to have a first aid kit. I'm good. What they discovered is that when Asian people moved to North America, within 10 years, they had all of the same statistics that we did here because of the choices that they began to make, because they began to integrate into our society and eat all of the things that we shouldn't, do all of the things that we did, and they had all the same results. Well, when the little people would come down out of the mountains, it kind of was a heartbreaker. Some days you'd see as our group would come into, we were in near Chiclayo, Peru, and we had many little different cities that a group of us were working in, and it was a different city every day, and it was a lot of fun. We enjoyed it, but we were traveling from one region to the other. And we went into a region where they began to truck people down the mountains out of what they called the Sierras from way, way up on the foothills of the Andes. And they would come by what looked like cattle trucks. These were the trucks that they hauled the produce and the animals and things from the mountains down to the city. And if you wanted some transportation, you just jumped on top of the truck and you rode all night long. And so when they brought the people into these clinics, it didn't matter if you were a little old grandma in a skirt or you were a child or you were a man. It really didn't matter. You all rode in the truck. Yeah, they were up there with the llamas and the pigs and the goats and the chickens and, on top of the bags of rice or whatever they had. And here they came down the mountains. And this little lady came in, and I looked at her and I thought, man, somebody stole her from Pharaoh's tomb. She is, add water, you'd have grandma. She was so withered and aged. And, she was kind of almost a representative of a lot of the people who came. They'd had a hard life, a pretty harsh life. And so, I asked so many of these people that looked like this, so why are you here today? Oh, I've got pains, my joints and my bones and my neck and my back, my muscles, they all hurt and I'm so miserable. Anything else? Oh, yeah. Last time I went to the doctor, he said that my blood sugar was high. What else? Oh, I'm thinking my cholesterol is probably high. My heart doesn't feel very good, and I'm short of breath, and I have to sleep sitting up. And you got this whole litany of chronic degenerative lifestyle diseases from people that were living where you didn't think they could have a lifestyle disease. How did they get it? So I began to ask people, what do you drink? Do you drink a lot of water? Well, no, we drink tea and we drink coffee. We drink some beer and we drink some wine. You don't drink any water? Well, a little, but not a lot. So what are you eating? Do you have a garden? Well, yeah, but I like my lambs. I like the chickens. I like the pork. I like the fish. And so, I thought you were eating rice and beans. No, I eat a little bit of that, but I like my meat. Meat is what's been good for me. Okay. So, when do you go to sleep at night? Oh, I suppose 11:30 or midnight or whatever. It was chronic. Person after person after person after person. And I'm like, what are you staying up and doing? And it was person after person. And I began to say, this is incredible. These people are, and I would feel so bad for, sometimes these women would come in and I could tell they've had this really hard life. And I thought, man, they must be like old grandmas. And I found out they were 5 or 10 years younger than me. And I knew they must have had a pretty tough life to do that, but I began to ask constantly these lifestyle questions that I would ask these people over and over and over, and the response always came back, the same thing. I go to bed late or early in the morning. I eat a lot of fat, I eat a lot of meat, I eat a lot of sugar. I don't drink very much water. I'm drinking some alcohol, I'm drinking some tea, I'm drinking some coffee. Yeah, and I lost my teeth because I've been chewing on the coca leaves, chewing on the betel nut, and that's the lifestyle that they were choosing, and that's the result was such incredible suffering and premature aging. And one day this little lady shows up in my clinic, and I said, well, Grandma, what can I do for you? What's wrong? Do you have any pain in your bones? No. Do you have high blood pressure? No. Do you suffer from anything? Are you on any medications? No. I said, so what's the problem? And she said, well, sometimes I get a little tired. I was wondering if there was any chance, did you bring any vitamins with you? If I maybe had some vitamins, I think I might have a little more energy. And I could work a little harder, get a few more things done. And I said, oh yeah, we've got some vitamins. And she said, are they like, totally complete vitamins? Yeah, it's got everything in it. It'd probably do some good for you. And I said, so you don't have any problems? And she's, no. And I thought, man, that's amazing, because this lady not long ago in this other little village, we spent 15 minutes, the nurse that was with me, Livy, I didn't speak a whole lot of Spanish at that time, so Livy's going with this lady, and she said, okay, so what is your problem, Grandma? And she said, I've got this, and she went through this long oration about how much she'd suffered with it, and and she went through on and on and on, and I'm sitting there like, wow. I'm looking at my watch, and this lady's going on and on and on. And finally, I said to Livy, I said, if she had all that, right now she'd be dead. So Livy said, oh, excuse me. You have all of this right now? She said, no. Well, what do you have right now? Nothing. This is just what I've had in the past. So I'm kind of surprised that this lady is not trying to do the same thing. Because, basically what they wanted was somebody who'd listen. They just wanted somebody who cared, somebody that'd take the time to listen to them. And so this little grandma, I said, finally, and these other people, I'd say, you know, what, like that lady there, she was 70-something years old. And so I'm asking this lady here, I'm going, but Grandma, no pain, no high cholesterol, no heart disease, no diabetes. You just want some vitamins. Yeah. Okay, Grandma, I got to know. When do you go to bed at night? Well, I don't have electricity, so I go when the chickens go. Okay. So what do you drink? You drink coffee and all that? No, I don't like it. I just drink water. And sometimes I have some fruit juice, but pretty much I just drink the water from the spring from behind the hill in my house. So what do you eat? Are you eating lots of chickens and pork and sheep? And no. You know, that stuff's kind of greasy. I never really cared for it, and so I'm pretty much just eating the rice and you know, the frijoles and, you know, the vegetables and things. And there's fruits that grow in the mountains and things. And I've really just tended to gravitate toward that. I really like that stuff. It agrees with me. Oh, okay. How old are you? I'm not sure, 102 or 103. And I just looked at her and I was stunned, and I thought, God, you were right. This lady somehow made the choices to do all the things that God put in his book. She gets the fresh air. She's out in the sunshine. She's going to bed with the chickens at night, so she's getting up early in the morning when the sun comes up. She's not groggy. And she's out working hard, getting lots of exercise. She doesn't have any heart disease. Her immune system's good and strong. Got plenty of vitamin D to keep her bones strong. She doesn't care for any of the animal products, and she's living off of all of these good vegetables and fruits and grains and nuts and things that are giving her all of the phytonutrients to make her system the strongest possible. And she wants some vitamins because she'd like a little more energy so she could work a little harder. I thought, God, you are so amazing. I said, ma'am, can I take your picture? No problem. She was happy to give us her picture. Diabetes is very pervasive in the world today. Currently, we've got about 180 million people currently worldwide diagnosed with diabetes. And then if you look at the statistic, they get even more morbid if you see how many more are pre-diabetic and how many are undiagnosed. You could almost add about another 60% to that number if you added those others into that. All around the world. And you ask the question, why is there so much diabetes today? And the issue, or the answer to that issue simply is lifestyle. I understand there's two types of diabetes. There's type 1, which primarily children get, but you don't have to be a child to get it. I've seen it in young adults. I've seen it a time or two in some people in middle-aged years can come up with type 1, but primarily it is type 2 diabetes that we're speaking of here, and type 2 diabetes, I believe, is a lifestyle condition. I just rarely find type 2 diabetes in a person who is living like that little grandma on the side of the mountain, eating and all of the good things, drinking the good things, sleeping when they ought to be, and working and getting the exercise and things that they ought to do. And I have a firm conviction that if we could get everybody who would live like that little grandma, we'd take these numbers and we'd nearly wipe them out. Risk factors. Number one risk factor is obesity. The more excess pounds you put on your body, excess kilos, I'm not sure what you do up here, I haven't kept up. I wish we in the United States would join the whole rest of the world and go to the metric system. It'd be such a relief. I get back home from traveling around the world and I have to go back to the miles and inches, and it's such an archaic, crazy system. Why can't we do it in multiples of 10 back there? I don't know. You know, when I was a child, we almost did. I began to see all of our road signs and everything started to get up in miles and kilometers, and I'm like, wow. And we began to see all kinds of units and measures coming up, and we came really close. And then all of a sudden, some big political person couldn't make the conversion somehow, and it pulled the plug on it, and we all went back to this old crazy English system that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, but I've learned how to live with it. I've got it all memorized. I know if you go 60 miles an hour, you do a mile in a minute, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. It's kind of a pain to be a backyard mechanic and have to have two sets of tools in my toolbox so that I can work on one half of the vehicle that was made in America and the other half that came from some Asian country. And you never know which is which. And the wrench slips off. Well, I've got the wrong one. I'll try over again. But the more pounds we put on, the more it begins to diminish our circulation, the more pressure it puts in our system, the more load that it puts on not only the circulatory system, but the more issues our body begins to have with insulin resistance. We know that there are complications. From diabetes, we see the complications of infections, ulcerations. Eventually, when the circulation begins to continue to diminish, we run the risk of eventually seeing amputation. And amputations from diabetes, probably the most prevalent cause than any other cause that there is. And it's not a pretty thing when you begin to see these infections. A low-fat diet, drastically reducing the intake of foods containing fats, are the very first thing somebody should do if they discover that they are being diagnosed with diabetes, or if they are discovering that they are in a pre-diabetic state. I guess probably we should just never go there in the first place. But if you do discover yourself in that place, you need to begin to drop the fat and increase the fiber. You know, fiber is put in our food for a good reason. It helps us to time release the sugar into our system. You know, you take time released medications because they last longer over a period of time. You don't have these spikes in the blood levels or whatever. Same thing with the sugar. That's why God put the sugar from an apple in an apple with all the fiber. It's the fiber that makes it applesauce and not apple juice. And so that fiber, this is the same fiber that you find in oatmeal versus the sugar that you'd find in the oats if you were to break it down, the carbohydrates, and put it in a spoonful, and whatever it comes from, orange, apple, banana, grains, whatever that carbohydrate comes from, if you take it and just put it in a spoon and put it in your mouth, you get this immediate spike. And the body says, well, I've got this big bunch of food that was just eaten, because look at all the sugar in my system right now. So it cranks out this whole big shot of insulin to try and deal with this whole bunch of food you're going to eat. And it sets the timer and says, well, that's probably about a loaf of bread and 6 oranges that just got in here. Little did it know it was a candy bar. And the timer is keeping on making the insulin. And so you've got this spike up and then crash down because there's no fiber to time release it out, and now you've got this low spot and you're like, man, I got a low blood sugar, I need another one of those candy bars. And so we're constantly hammering our poor system with these low fiber, high fat, high sugar foods. You know, they did a study where we have always thought that it was sugar that caused diabetes. You know, sugar, we're afraid of it. The study is actually have shown that it's the fat more than the sugar that's causing the diabetics to have the issues that they are. Physical activity, we saw this young man in our last presentation. Did you know that jumping rope for 10 minutes vigorously will burn more calories than almost any other thing you can do? Now that's not one of these where you're doing this, okay? It's where you're doing this. But I took an aerobics class when I was in college, and that's the one thing I remember from it. That's basically it. It's about all I remember from that class. But that physical activity is so important because it does some things to the circulatory system. Yes, it moves the blood. Yes, it does move the nutrients, but it also has some other effects. I know these look like green olives. Yeah, they look like salad olives, but they're my pitiful desktop publishing attempt at coming up with some cells within your human body. You see, the little red spots, those kind of are representing the glucose transport mechanisms that every cell has. And it's, how do they say on a map that somebody just kind of scribbled it out, not drawn to scale? This is not anatomically correct, but it's here to get a point across. But your glucose transport mechanisms that function within a cell, the more exercise that you get, the more they function. The less exercise you get, the more they begin to slow down. And there's a whole huge process, which takes me back to what God put in the Bible. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. To understand that how that whole process works would be like a chapter and a half in a big textbook. It's incredibly complex, but suffice it to say, for the occasion, the more exercise you get, the more effective they're going to work. The more optimally they work, the greater the rapidity with the function of transporting the glucose into the cell, moving it around, combining it with the insulin, getting the insulin into there, and getting that metabolism to go, so the mitochondria can fire up, and we can make ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which turns into energy, which moves the world, right? And so when we don't get enough exercise, that mechanism begins to diminish dramatically, and we get these tiny little responses. And so now it takes more and more and more insulin in the body to be able to convert the glucose into energy and to burn it up and get rid of it. And when you can't really keep up with it, you begin to have these high levels of blood sugar. And the poor pancreas, the little islet cells in the pancreas begin to rebel at the work that they've been put under, and they slowly but surely begin to say, I can't do this anymore, and they begin to stop their functioning, one after the other. And now you say, well, I'll whip you a little harder with some medication for a while, and they try a little harder, and finally the medication doesn't whip them sufficiently, and then what's left? Supply something in place of what they were doing, and so you find yourself dependent on insulin. Exercise is probably one of the most important things you can do. You even could eat too much and eat too much fat and eat too much sugar if you were exercising sufficiently to deal with this. Not that I'm trying to tell you should do that. One of the conditions that goes hand in hand with diabetes is heart disease. The majority of diabetics, if they live their lives long enough, will discover they're going to be suffering from heart disease eventually. Causes of heart disease, lo and behold, they're the same cause as diabetes, aren't they? Yes, I know there are some hereditary factors involved in here, but the largest factors for the majority of people are the high-fat and low-fiber foods. We were not built to run on this kind of fuel. This is not in that Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 3 plan for the human body. It's not what God intended for us. And all we have to do, if we want to begin to work against heredity and against our trained responses in our life, and that is say, you know what, I'm going to make a conscious choice to change. That's kind of hard sometimes, isn't it? You know, my wife went away for a week, and she went to an event with our church, and they had a very famous health speaker there. We're talking, 20 years or so ago, and maybe 22 or 3 years ago. And this guy was an allergist, and he was talking about how if you would cut a lot of things out of your diet, you could live longer, you could be healthier, you'd have less infections. And he just was going through this whole thing, less reactivity to environmental allergens, less food allergens. He was just going through this great litany of things, I guess. I wasn't there, I didn't hear it, but I know who he is and I know what he teaches, so I'm assuming she heard the standard fare there. Anyway, she comes home and she's all excited. And she had made up her mind while she's gone that we're going to change it all. Yeah, she's going to change. I mean, she's going to throw stuff out of the pantry, out of the cupboard, out of the refrigerator. She's cleaning it all out. She's going to go to the store, and she's going to buy all new food, and we're going to go on this new health kick. And she's telling me all this, and she says, and we're going to change this, and we're going to change that, and we're going to change this. And I'm like, She got to the end of it, and I said, you can just change your address. I am not doing it. I am sorry, that is so ridiculous. That is so retarded. I am not doing that. Just don't talk to me about that. So she did. She made her change, and she said, okay, here's your junk over here in the refrigerator. Here's our stuff over here. Here's your junk in the pantry. Here's our stuff over here. The kids and I are going to eat this, and you're going to eat that. And that worked okay. But you know, the problem was I couldn't drink as much of the milk as the stuff that of my milk as she had of her milk, and the stuff started getting sour, and I'd have to throw it away, and I'd have to drink hers, and it was nasty. At least so I thought. And, you know, sometimes she'd forget to buy my food, and I started getting to where I have to eat some of hers. And I kind of noticed that whereas my kids had been sick all the time, they had all the colds all the time. They were forever having to go to the clinic to get their ears checked out and another antibiotic for another ear infection. And oh, here comes strep again. Somebody in this family always had strep. Discovered my wife was a carrier. Didn't matter how much antibiotic you threw at her, how many courses or what it was. All I had to do was get tired and she'd give it back to me again, or one of the kids got it. And so we were always struggling, and it was amazing to me that I noticed that she had made all these changes. That we're saving a lot of money. We haven't taken the kids in for 2 or 3 months. And I noticed that my allergies weren't quite so bad. And I thought, well, dummy, why don't you join them? And I did, and my allergies went almost all away, and I began to breathe easier, and I began to live easier, and I could work better. And I began to realize that there was something really good with what she was doing. Some more of the major causes of heart disease: obesity, lack of exercise, which I suppose they probably are kind of in the same group of cousins, tobacco, alcohol, and caffeine. If you have heart disease in your family, friends, you better think twice about participating with any of those categories because they will and can kill you eventually. I want to talk about sugar. You notice we're kind of making this whole spectrum of just good general things to consider to have a long, productive, non-miserable life. There are epidemics, there are flus, there are colds. You know, when I flew up here, I was on this Alaska Airlines flight, and there was a whole group of people in front of me that had come in together, and a whole group of people that had come in behind me. One was a bunch of construction workers who were coming from someplace else to work on some big commercial project. And then there was another group behind me who had just gotten off of some cruise ship, and it was there for a wedding or something, a whole bunch of people. And they were all brown, looked like they'd had a good time, and which is unusual for people up here to be that brown. But, you know, I'm sitting there, and I'm listening. Somebody either in front of me or behind me was coughing almost incessantly. There was hardly ever a moment without a coughing sound. And I don't know if it was a contest between this group and that group or what was going on, but they were coughing and coughing and coughing and coughing. And, you know, I've read the stories, you know, in airplanes, they recirculate the air over and over and over again. And I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be breathing in all this stuff. You know, the incubation period on these viruses is what? Day and a half, 2 days, 3 days, or whatever. I should be sick right now. I should be coughing. I should have a cold. I should maybe have a fever and a flu. But I don't. Why? Because I have an immune system. And my immune system, friends, is working very well. And I'll share you a few little thoughts about your immune system. How much sugar are we consuming? First of all, average American, And by American, I'm saying North American, somebody who lives on this continent. We all pretty much, we share a language and we share a lifestyle here. Depends on whose statistics you follow, but it's between 36 and 39.5 teaspoons of sugar per day. And you say, not me? Well, that means somebody else out there is eating even more than that. But that's the national average in the United States, and it's more than likely very, very similar in Canada as well. 39 teaspoons of sugar. Well, where does it come from? Well, how much sugar is there in a can of soda? It depends on what you're drinking, somewhere between 9 and 16 teaspoons of sugar. That's for just, the regulars can. What if you went in and you got one of these big monster ones? Got a can and a half, 2 cans in there. You could have as high as 20 or 28 or so in that one drink. And some people are drinking 2 of those a day. Candy bars, 4, 5, 6 teaspoons of sugar. Piece of pie, 3 or 4, 5, depending on how gooey it is. A couple of pieces of candy, a stick of gum here and there. Your ketchup's got a little in. Your cereals, the kids start out the day with the sugar-added cereals. It just adds up and up and up and up. And that's why people are eating far more hidden sugars than they think of. They'll think, well, I'm not eating it because, I'm drinking everything without sugar in it. I'm being very careful. It's in so many things. That's why I recommend to people, get your stuff out of your garden and eat it if you possibly can. If you're going to have to buy it from the store, go to the produce section and buy it. Don't be utilizing things that are manufactured in factories if you can avoid them, because they're full of it. But look at, if you have no sugar on board, bacteria, you can kill 14 with one of your macrophage white cells. 6 teaspoons of sugar, it drops it down to 10. 12 teaspoons of sugar, 5.5. 24, 1-on-1. Whereas before, your immune system had a 14-to-1 advantage. Now, with just 24 teaspoons of sugar, it's 1-on-1. Those little viruses and bacteria, they're more prolific than rabbits. They can just make babies so fast and make your head swim, and you can be so sick for so long because you've paralyzed your immune system. And think of it, if you're not getting your rest, you've got a whole bunch of stress hormones in your body because you didn't get enough rest. You didn't detoxify because you didn't get your rest like you should have. Perhaps your fluid intake's not like it's supposed to be, so your blood is thicker, and you're not transporting oxygen around in your cells like you should, as you have before. And so now your anaerobic organisms are saying, I'm getting a little happier here because there's less oxygen. I can make babies faster with, I'm stronger and more virulent. And so they're beginning to really do their job as fast as they can go. And here you are trying to beat the bug. And you think because you took some vitamin C or some echinacea, you're going to turn the tide. You got a lot of things to do before you come back. But, you're not getting any sunlight, so you don't have the vitamin D. Your immune system takes another hit. You just look at what happens. You're eating a whole lot of fat in your diet. What does the fat do? Sticks all your blood cells together so they can't even get apart from one another to do the job they're supposed to do. Can you imagine if you sent a whole bunch of cops out to try and deal with a riot and you had them all handcuffed together? What good are they going to be out there? They're all trying to get away from each other to do the job they're doing, and that's what your cells are trying to do when they're all stuck together. That's why we need to be consuming the least amount of sugar possible. And people say, what's the best thing I can do when I think I'm going to come down with a flu bug or something? And I just tell them, stop eating. Drink water. Don't drink juice. Don't drink any pop. Drink water and starve. You know, and then if you really think, well, I was a naughty boy or a naughty girl today and I did all that stuff you said I shouldn't do, what do I do? Well, if you exercise, or even if you go in and take a really nice hot shower, anything to turn up your metabolic rate and get your circulation going, you'll burn up more sugar just to create the energy you need for this extra activity that's going on. And you can begin to get these numbers back in your favor again so your immune system can do the job it's supposed to do. Let's look at causes of death in the United States. They're probably the same in most of the Western world. Tobacco, 450,000 people. That's a lot of deaths, isn't it? Are they necessary? Is smoking necessary? What does it do for us? Anything? Yeah, you guys have about the same mentality I have. I haven't figured it out yet. I quit smoking. I immediately got allergic to it. And I think that was a gift from heaven because there was no temptation to go back to it. Like anytime I got anywhere near it, it's like, oh, I can't believe I was so stupid. Stay away from that. 450,000 people a year dying from tobacco-related illnesses. I'm hoping those statistics are coming down. These from a few years back. Experts are telling us that fewer and fewer people are taking up smoking. I don't know it's because the message is getting out or they simply can't afford it. I quit smoking because it made me so angry when they charged me 75 cents a pack. I sat down with a calculator and I started thinking, you know, if for $75 a pack, 75 cents, you know, for every 10 days, $7.50 times 3, wow. You know, I could be putting $30-something a month probably away from my smoking habit in a bank at compound interest. Man, I could retire from my smoking habit before I'm 60. Just if I do that. And then I started looking at, well, and the 2-pack a day thing, wow, that's 60 whatever. You know, back when I was a kid, that was almost a vehicle payment. What is it today? It's $7 and $8 a pack. You're smoking $15 a day. 10 days, you got $150. 20 days, you got $300. 30 days, you're $450. Man, that's a pretty nice car payment, isn't it? That's almost a Mercedes. And it amazes me sometimes I'll see homeless people sitting out in front of somewhere with a sign and I'm like, how can you afford to smoke? Is that your house payment you're smoking right now? It's amazing. Alcohol, 110,000. Accidents of all kinds. We're talking car accidents, we're talking industrial accidents, farm, agriculture accidents, people falling off of bridges, whatever. It's all together. Accidents, you know, we're always concerned about accidents. We've got ambulances waiting all over to help people with accidents. And it's like 1/8 of the amount of people dying from tobacco-related causes. AIDS, the big epidemic we thought was going to wipe out the entire world in, you know, just one generation that everybody's so afraid of. 35,000, it's not even a tenth as bad as what's happening with tobacco. And drugs, as bad as they are, it appears to me tobacco is probably the worst drug of all of them. I've actually had a addiction counselor tell me that it's easier to get off of cocaine than it is off of tobacco. Premature death. People who die from smoking, 25% of the smokers die prematurely. And those who do are going to lose on the average of 21 years of their life. 1 pack a day. Look at the increase in the risk of suicide. It's amazing. I just don't see what there is. How many of you have ever seen the Marlboro Man? Anybody of you see the Marlboro Man when he went on a campaign against tobacco after he realized how sick and how short his life was going to be? He looked pretty awful, and he wanted the world to see what it had done for him. He wanted to stop people and to undo as much of the damage as he had done. want to talk about alcohol. We had an entire program on alcohol recently. This is going to be extremely abbreviated, but alcohol, even 2 drinks, will shut your immune system down by 67%. That's 2 beers, 2 shots, 2 wine coolers, whatever. You know, it's about all the same, you know, same amount, 2 mixed drinks. Cut your immune system down by 67%. I'm not exactly certain exactly how it does that, but I've got my guesses. You know, we live in a country where it gets cold in the winter, and we put alcohol in our gas tank sometimes to try and absorb the excess moisture out of it, don't we? So we don't get gas lines all frozen up. Those of you who lived in colder countries than this know more of what I'm talking about than those of you who live here in the temperate zone. But if you went back to Winnipeg, you'd all know what I'm talking about. Glad you don't live there, aren't you? But alcohol does dry out the gas tank, takes out the excess moisture. It's going to do the same thing in your bloodstream. It's going to dry it out and definitely affect the quality of your cells. Now, I'm going to talk about something that's going to affect a lot of people here. In this country, my country, every country I go around, caffeine seems to be the drug of choice. A lot of people cannot seem to function without it. They go to bed late at night, and they got to get up in the morning, and they feel like trash. And so what does it take to get them going? A cup of coffee, right? Or 2, or 3, or 4, and then some Mountain Dew. That doesn't get you going. Let's try a little bit of something with some real, we'll take one of those new, you know, scary type energy drinks that all the young people are drinking. Triple caffeine. What does caffeine actually do for you? Does it do anything good for us? Well, I suppose you might say, well, you know, it does help people who have a really bad migraine. But the thing that the dichotomy is there, it actually helps to trigger migraines. So not too sure about that completely. But caffeine is a leading cause of depression in this world. You know, a lot of people will say, just the other day, somebody told me we were discussing chocolate versus caffeine, and they said, well, you know, is there anything wrong with chocolate? And I said, well, they said, where does it come from? And I said, well, it comes from a tree that grows in tropical countries, and there's little pods, and there's little seeds inside, and there's little sweet, yummy, gooey stuff surrounding the pods that, you know, I've eaten it before, and it's kind of yummy. If you spit it on the grass, it'll kill the grass within a day. But the chocolate in itself, they dry it and they grind it up and they add some fat and some sugar to it, and then, you know, we like it, and it's got a caffeine-like substance called theobromine. This lady says, you know, as soon as I stopped caffeine, I could get off my antidepressants, and she said, and the last thing I had to get rid of before I could get off the antidepressants was the chocolate, because it contains theobromine, which is sort of a cousin of caffeine. A lot of neurologists say they call it caffeine, even though it's a dissimilar compound, but it has the same effect. What does caffeine do to the system? I kind of want to describe it. This is kind of a balance. When we were little kids, and if we lived in the country, we went to a country school, and they had these little devices that we'd sit on, and, you know, I'd kick it and I'd go up, and you'd kick it and I'd go down, and we'd go back and forth, and it was exercise and education and cooperation and whatever, and it was good for us. But in the nerve synapses, we have to, in order for the nerve conductivity, for signals to go across from one part of the one nerve to the next, we have these little spaces. We have to have something that will transmit the electrical signal. And so God put neurotransmitter solutions or chemicals in there, and there's a number of them there, but the 2 more important ones are the acetylcholine and the adenosine. Acetylcholine seems to speed up the transmission of an impulse. Adenosine works to slow it down. And so if it's in the right combination, the thought processes go through our body at the right speed, and everything kind of works pretty well. But if you add some caffeine to the situation, we have an increase in the acetylcholine and a decrease in the adenosine. And guess what happens? Things begin to move a little faster through our brain than they're really programmed to work. And things can happen. You know, I'm kind of amazed as I've traveled all over the world. I've asked people, have you ever heard of Lucille Ball and the I Love Lucy show? Every country I've been in, I don't care how backward it is, somebody's heard of it. I guess they dubbed it in every language and reran it all over the world after it was gone from the U.S. But I remember that Lucy and her friend, Vivian, I think, they went to work in a candy factory. Some of you remember that episode. So they get in there and the guy says, okay, here it comes down the conveyor belt. You're going to pick them up, put them in the little boxes, stack them up. And yeah, we can do that. And so he lets it run really slow and they're doing a really good job and they're jabbering away and he's over there turning up the rheostat on the electrical motor and pretty soon it's going a little faster and a little faster. And all of a sudden, they can't keep up. And so there they are. They're shoving them in their mouth, down their blouse, you know, in their pockets, whatever. They're dropping them on the floor. That's kind of what happens when we add caffeine to the thought process of the brain. We cannot have the right kind of judgment that we had hoped that we would have without it. It also increases adrenaline. What is adrenaline for? It's for the fight or flight reflex within the body. Something really bad happens and we're either angry or we're going to make a choice. We're either going to fight or we're going to run. And we've got to have superhuman strength at about this time. I remember one time I was parking my vehicle trying to figure out what was making that funny sound and I couldn't figure it out, and so I put it up on a jack and I'm listening and I'm turning the wheel and all of a sudden it rolled forward off the jack, rolled up against the curb, and the wheel landed on top of my foot. And it's not moving because it's got a jack holding it up against the curb. And there's some guys over there, and I'm telling them, hey, help me. And they're laughing at me. No, they're not going to help you, fool. You got yourself into that. Get yourself out of it. And I remember reaching down, grabbing the fender of my vehicle with all that adrenaline, and I picked my vehicle up, and I pulled my foot out, and I set it down. And they ran. It wouldn't have mattered. I couldn't run anyway. My foot hurt too bad. Imagine the weight of a vehicle on the top of somebody with slightly higher archers. It wasn't a great thing. But adrenaline is what turns on the body and makes it move. You know, when you have a whole bunch of a shot of adrenaline in your system, what happens to your judgment? Are you thinking really clear when the boogeyman says boo? No, you're not thinking really clear. Not the time for you to start making serious life decisions, is it? Not a good time to start thinking how much money you're going to invest for retirement. Not a real good time to decide whether you're going to say yes or no to the guy who's down on one knee holding a rose in his hand. We tend to make some boo-boos in life because we are not in the right state of mind. Caffeine also elevates dopamine levels in the bloodstream, in the brain. People with excessive dopamine, it's something that's got to be in there. It's good for us, but it's good in the right proportion. When it gets excessive, sometimes we find there's a correlation between excess dopamine levels and different types of psychosis. 120 milligrams of caffeine per cup. If you put that into that syringe right there and you put it into your bloodstream, push down on that plunger and it goes into your veins, don't even bother calling 911. You'd be better off to call the hearse because you're not going to be alive when they get there to pick you up to do anything about it. It's that toxic to your system. But when it goes through your digestive tract, it kind of gets time released out. And what happens is the body says, okay, there's something going on here. So, bam, kick in the adrenaline. Now, because the adrenaline's there, now the blood begins to pump, the heart begins to race, and it pumps, and it pumps, and it pumps, and it pumps, and it gets it to go through the liver, and it can metabolize it and break it down, detoxify it, and throw it out. Finally, it gets done with it, and the body goes, wow, that was a close one. And you go, wow, I need some more coffee. Tired. I want to talk a little bit for just a moment about one of my favorite foods from years gone by. I used to love, if I was going to order a pizza, it had to have triple cheese or double cheese. I ate all the cheese I could get into my system. What is cheese high in? Fat. It does have some calcium. The advertisements are correct. It's also high in fat. One of the things that I perceived about it, though, is if you watch the standard person, especially the young people and the teenagers, and you watch how much they eat of this stuff, somebody needs to get something under control. You know, the cheese is this thick on everything they eat. There's no moderation going on in a lot of people's experience when it comes to this. It tastes good, doesn't it? I see one person shaking their head, no, smart kid. But for the average person, we crave it. You know, it goes melted on. Oh, man. It's gooey. It's stretchy. It smells good. But I want to tell you some things that it does. I'm not even going to talk about what it might do with your cholesterol levels. Not going to talk about what it might do for your diabetes. I want to talk about what it's going to do to your brain. This is what really was a clincher for me as I began to study this. There is a chemical compound called tryptamine found in cheese. And tryptamine is a very mild hallucinogenic drug. Very, very, very mild. But the more you eat of it, the larger the portions you eat, of course, the more you intake into your body. There's also another drug called Tryptamine, which is sort of a sedative. Another drug called casomorphine, which some researchers have some ideas that may actually have something to do with attention deficit disorder in some of the kids that we have in our schools today. And one more called Tryptophan, which is found in levels of tissue of fish and chicken and turkeys and cows and things of that nature. It is a sedative on the central nervous system. But I just started thinking about all these things. You know, the people who eat these tons and tons of cheeseburgers and, you know, cheese curds and fried cheese and grilled cheese sandwich and triple cheese burgers and pizzas and cheese in your salad and, you know, all these places that we just overconsume this food like crazy. What does it do to our brain? How can you make a good decision? It just makes me wonder just a little bit how God told us that we should be eating what? Fruits, grains, nuts, and vegetables. You know, meat has a lot of cholesterol, a lot of fat, a lot of things that are not necessarily in its favor. But as I was looking to see some of the chemistry, I found that it has a drug in it called arachidonic acid. And we all have arachidonic acid in our tissue, in our blood, in our meat. We have it. It's there for a reason. It helps to control things. But when you get too much of it, it becomes a central nervous system sedative. It affects the frontal lobe of the brain, and it kind of slows our judgment down just a little bit. Second one, most people call it HC17 because it's easier, quicker, shorter, hydroxycorticosteroid 17. Had to prove I could say it. It's a tongue twister. You can't say it backwards. I can't anyway. What does it do? Anybody ever grow up on a farm around cattle? Anybody? Do cows want to go up a loading chute and get into a truck? Pigs want to do that? No animal wants to get corralled into a squeeze chute and pushed down and run into a truck and hauled off to market. So how do they get them to go? They take an electrical instrument called a shock prod and they put it on their back end and they push the button and it suddenly changes their mind, doesn't it? It gives them a jolt and they move. It's the predecessor of the taser. And it really changes people's minds if you get shocked, doesn't it? You know, you're working and all of a sudden you get a big shock. You're not thinking about anything you were thinking about a second before. HC17 is interesting, the fact that we've heard of the blood-brain filter, haven't you? There's this like passive filter built into the brain so that we don't have things getting into some parts of the brain. It's a protection mechanism. But what we've discovered is that The lower parts of the brain have a larger type filter portal. The passageways and the screen is, so to speak, is a little bit larger. But the farther and closer we get to the frontal lobe of the end of the brain, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So things of certain particle sizes don't get up here that can get down here. Now, keep in mind that up here, what's up here? This is our judgment. This is our conscience. This is where we make our decisions. What's down here? Our animal passions. HC17, when we eat a whole bunch of this fatty meat, it comes up in here and it gets into our bloodstream and it comes in here and it begins to excite this part of the brain, but it can't get to this one. But the arachidonic acid got to this one, and so this one gets shut down and this one gets hyped up. What kind of character judgment decisions can we make when we're going against the Edenic plan that God gave to Adam and Eve? Kind of scary, I think. And that's why one of the reasons I look at these Bible verses in a different way. He says, beseech you therefore by the mercies of God that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, and be ye not transformed or conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's different to me. I'm thinking differently than I was before when I started thinking about what I'm eating and what I'm drinking, what I'm doing, what I'm putting into my body, and begin to take a second look and say, whoa, I need to prove what is good and acceptable and what that perfect will of God. I think I might make a little bit different choice. In 1 Corinthians 10:31 that most of us know, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. It means more to me. But this is one of my favorite passages in conjunction with this, and this is from Revelation 22, verse 4, and it says, they shall see his face. Who? The redeemed. The saints in heaven. The ones who have gone through all of the trials and heartache and misery in this world. Their robes have been dipped in the blood of the Lamb. They've been purified. They've been justified. They've been sanctified. And God looks down and he sees, hey, they've got my character. I'm going to take them home. What does he see on their face? He sees his name. What's God's name? It's a representative of who he is. It's his character. And where does he see it? On their forehead. And what's behind here? The frontal lobe. Friends, I believe that God really knew what he was doing when he put the information he did into the scripture, when he told us what to do. You know, he didn't give us a whole big bunch of scientific details, but today when we examine science, I believe that we can find ample evidence to back up what God told us that we should do in the very beginning of time. When I make my choices of what I'm going to eat and what I'm going to drink or what I'm not going to drink or what I'm not going to eat, my mind goes back to these things and I recognize that I want to glorify God in all the things that I do because I want his name. I want his character. I want to have the mind of Christ when Jesus comes. And I hope you do too.